Okay, so I'm continuing the lecture series on Slavoj Žižek, and in this video we are going to be covering a topic called Troika of the Real, and we'll get straight into the overview. So, what is referred to as the Troika of the Real is the type of intellectual triad formed by the Slovenian psychoanalytic group, or the leading thinkers of the Slovenian psychoanalytic group, which includes Slavoj Žižek, which includes Alenka Zupančič, and which includes Mladen Dolar. Each of these thinkers brings something unique to the Troika. Of course, all of them have a fundamental analytic orientation which they share in common, and that includes Hegelian metaphysics and a post-analytic idealism. So to start, I would say that the Hegelian metaphysics in its essence is the idea that the one or unity has to be understood from the point of view of cut, or has to be understood from the point of view of division, or has to be understood from the point of view of antagonism. So in other words, Hegelian metaphysics doesn't negate the one as such, but attempts to understand the one as a becoming, attempts to understand the one as a process, attempts to understand the one as a fall from and return to, and nothing but that. And that particular metaphysics is a very interesting and unique metaphysics to think in relationship to psychoanalysis, because psychoanalysis brings us into the libidinal territory of subjectivity. It brings us into the libidinal territory of desire. And of course, notions of the one are extremely problematic, which we'll get into with psychoanalysis. And that's why all these three thinkers share an orientation, which is a type of post-analytic idealism, which is to say that all thinkers tried to read German idealism, the thinkers from Kant to Hegel, through the lens of the Freudian unconscious, that is, through the lens of the libidinal economy, through the lens of sexual tensions, antagonisms, and desires. Moving on from that introduction, all thinkers attempt to work with, theoretically, material which you could say is the material after Lacan. So Lacan, as a return to Freud, leaves us with certain problems, leaves us with certain dimensions of the real, or dimensions of reality, which should be the analytic attention, which should direct and guide our analytic attention. Two of the main problematics here include the relationship between desire and drive, and include the relationship between symptom and sinthome. So the relationship between desire and drive is really a relationship between temporal phenomenology. So when we're in a mode of desire, it is always that we are hoping for a better state to come in the future. Whereas in the mode of the drive, we sort of enjoy more the process of our becoming, but yet still don't withdraw from the appearances, remain engaged in the appearances, enjoy the lack in the other, as it were. In this sense, the move from desire to drive can be correlated in some sense with the move from symptom to sinthome. In some sense, the ideal unity of the desire is a projection of the fact that the subject struggles with a symptom. And this struggle with a symptom prevents it from enjoying its existence, prevents it from enjoying its drive. And that's why the axiom enjoy one's symptom is very close to a perspectival shift on what one is struggling with existentially. To turn one's symptom into a synthome is to turn what one views as an obstacle into a means of repetitive enjoyment. And once we're in this territory of the drive and the synthome, we approach knots, also paradox, also contradiction of jouissance. So in other words, problems are always thought within the libidinal territory. Problems are always thought within the space of libido, the space of our relationship to the other in its most intense dimensions and its most intense determinations. And problems are always thought from the fact that in this space, when we don't withdraw from the space, but when we give ourselves to this space, there are always struggles of identity. There are always paradoxes of identity, and there are always contradictions of identity that emerge. And the more reflective we are of these knots, the more reflective we are of these paradoxes and contradictions and so forth, potentially the more honest we can become in our drive, and the more real we can become as subjects, even though that will involve processing a lot of negativity, specifically in relationship to the process of the one as a becoming. In this territory, one of the things that is brought up is that our current culture needs to have a new reflective awareness about the importance of prohibition, that not everything is allowed, or that not everything is possible. There are impossibilities. There are things which should have boundaries. Of course, that's up to self-determination. And the better we are at being reflective of our unconscious, the better we can get at understanding this dimension of prohibition. But also prohibition is very important for structuring our authentic desires. And also the importance of understanding tension and antagonism, that when we are withdrawing from tension and antagonism, we are going to reduce our capacity to grow, and it may even be a profound source of mental illness when we do not have the right flow or the right relationship to tension and antagonism. So on this horizon, after Lacan, there is a sense that the material we're working with is, and this reflects, of course, psychoanalysis, and this reflects, of course, the idea of the one as a process of self-differentiation as a cut, that we are the one in becoming, and the enjoyment of our symptom, the transformation of our identities into repetitive synthomes, some sort of elemental atoms of enjoyment, is the location where we can explore our own otherness, is the dimension where we can bring the new into being, is the dimension where we can explore modes of identity which have never existed before. That one achieves such a feat by deconstructing or questioning radically any master figures, not necessarily authority figures as such, but authority figures which would close or seek to predetermine self-differentiation, master figures or authority figures that would be basically attempting to mask their own symptom by owning or controlling others, manipulating others with their own shadows, you might say, with their own darkness, with their own unreflected unconscious imagery. And so the closer we are to aligning with our own internal vision and our own internal voice, the better we'll become at self-differentiating, the better we will become at embracing and transcending our negativities. And that ultimately this leads to the indeconstructible drive. In other words, it's not that we get rid of language, it's not that we withdraw from the appearances, but that we have to give ourselves to language in a way that is authentically aligned with the processual becoming of the unconscious. And that is sort of the Lacanian horizon here, or the horizon that is occupied by the troika of the real. So, sort of to summarize here, what the real is, and what Žižek, Zupančič, and Dolar sort of all coalesce around as a type of analytical object to give it a sort of perspective, is you have the real is always in relation to problems of jouissance. So whatever it is you're going through in your sexual life, which is or whatever it is in your libidinal territory that you tarry with, this is the location where your identity is in the real. That these problems are often perceived by identities as impossible or as a non-relation, meaning that of all the things in my reality which I can have a relation to, this antagonism, this sexual problem is something is present for me, but I do not have a relationship with it. It's sort of the active antagonism of the non-relationship. And this real as a impossibility, as a non-relationship, is often located as the pure opposite of the ego ideal. So whatever it is your ego is idealizing, and of course if this ego ideal is absent, the ego will become frustrated, the ego will become very aggressive, potentially. The ego will become very neurotic or hysterical, ultimately. Again, this brings us back to psychoanalysis with Freud's starting to study neurotic patients. But the real is the pure opposite of this ego ideal. So whatever your ego ideal is, and its absence, this is where your identity is struggling with the real. And that sort of gives you sort of a sense of where these thinkers call our attention, where these thinkers ask us to reflect deeply on ourself and on our own negativity as part of the becoming of the one. And that was an overview of Troika of the real, and the way in which, again, Žižek, Zupančič, and Dolar attempt to engage with philosophy in the present for our own battle with negativity, specifically in the libidinal spaces, specifically in the dimensions of ultimately what you could say is the death drive. So thanks for watching. I hope that's helpful.